On a quiet morning flight from New York to Seattle, no one could have imagined that a single moment in first class would make a $700 million deal disappear in just minutes. A well-dressed black woman with a calm, confident smile, Alicia Monroe, CEO of NovaLink Systems, was politely asked to leave her pre-booked seat. 1A. I'm sorry, ma'am. This seat is reserved for a special priority passenger, the flight attendant said as a white man, Gregory Hale, slid smoothly into the seat without even glancing at her. Now think about it if it were you. What would you do with the whole cabin watching? Some smirking, some pretending not to notice. Would you argue, get angry, or would you stay silent like Alicia, who simply nodded, moved to seat 18C, and began quietly remembering every detail? And what no one on that plane realized was that the woman who'd just been moved held the key technology North Star Air depended on to keep its entire system running. And just minutes later, when social media caught fire, that same system went dark. If you've ever been underestimated, stay till the end, because this story will make you smile. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As we begin, Black CEO removed from first class minutes later. A $700 million deal vanishes. That morning, the New York sky was impossibly clear, washed in the golden light of early autumn. JFK Airport shimmered beneath a soft amber hue. Among the passengers lining up for first class on North Star Air Flight 278 to Seattle, Alicia Monroe walked with measured grace. Her pale gray suit fit perfectly, elegant but understated. Her hair was neatly pinned. Her dark eyes calmed the look of someone who was used to commanding powerful rooms. No one would have guessed that this black woman was the CEO of NovaLink Systems, the tech company on the verge of signing a $700 million contract with the very airline she was about to board. Alicia never needed to flaunt her authority. She believed true power wasn't in how loudly you spoke, but in how quiet the room became when you did. But that morning, as she lifted her carry-on into the overhead bin above seat 1A, that quiet strength was about to be tested in a way no one expected. A young flight attendant, Rachel Martinez, approached with a strained smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said softly, "but this seat has to be reserved for a special priority passenger. We'll move you to seat 18C. It's still in business class." Alicia's brow furrowed. "Priority passenger, I booked this seat 2 weeks ago." "Is there a problem?" Rachel glanced away, avoiding eye contact. "It's an internal operations matter." "Ma'am, we appreciate your understanding." Just then, a white man in a black suit, Gregory Hale, mid-50s, approached, dragging his briefcase. Without asking, he glanced at Alicia's boarding pass and chuckled. "Oh, there must be some mix-up. I always sit in 1A on North Star flights. Habit, you know." The attendant's smile warmed immediately. "Of course, Mr. Hale. Please, make yourself comfortable." Alicia stood motionless for a brief moment. Her eyes cooled. Around her, people began to stare, some sympathetic, some pretending to scroll their phones, others just watching. The looks were all too familiar curiosity wrapped in indifference. She took a slow breath. "All right," she said quietly. "Not surrender, a choice." Because she knew some battles aren't won in the moment, they're won when others reveal exactly who they are. Lifting her bag, she walked down the aisle in silence. Each step along the red-carpeted floor echoed like history repeating itself another time, another place, where someone of color had to move, to yield, despite having paid, achieved, and earned their place. In seat 18C, beside the window, Alicia sat down. The light framed her face in calm dignity, no trace of anger, only focus. In her mind, every detail began recording itself: the time, The faces, the tone of voice, even the faint cologne worn by the man in 1A. Not for revenge, but for truth. Up front, Gregory Hale laughed loudly into his phone. "You won't believe this," he said, voice carrying through the cabin. "Some lady thought she could take my seat. Judging by her outfit, probably one of those boss lady types. Thinks buying a ticket makes her equal." His laughter rang through the air like a slap. Alicia turned her gaze to the window, closing her eyes not out of fear, but because she knew anger is a luxury for those who've lost direction. And she never lost hers. A few rows up, a young black man in row 17 stared, torn between outrage and disbelief. Then he picked up his phone and hit record. His hands trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. Meanwhile, Alicia unlocked her own phone. The screen flashed with a secure internal code. Her fingers typed swiftly. "Activate Protocol Sigma. Prepare discrimination complaint file. North Star Air. No public release until my command." The message vanished instantly. Above, the engines roared to life. As New York shrank below a miniature city of steel and glass, Alicia smiled faintly. "They think I'm just another passenger," she murmured. "But sometimes, the one pushed to seat 18C is the one who can shake seat 1A. Up front." Rachel avoided eye contact with everyone, her unease growing heavier by the minute. She knew what she'd done was wrong, but fear of losing her job kept her quiet. Jessica Barnes, the lead attendant, was different. To her, keeping order in first class mattered more than respect or fairness. The first 10 minutes of the flight passed in uneasy silence. No chatter, no laughter, only the soft tapping of phones and scattered sighs. Alicia opened her notebook and wrote 3 lines. September 15th, North Star 278. New York to Seattle. Seat 1A reassigned for operational priority. Witnesses male passenger. Row 17, Attendant Rachel M., Lead Attendant Jessica B., Subject Gregory Hale. Then, after a pause, she added one more. Respect's sometimes the only first-class seat you can't buy. When the seatbelt light came on, she closed the notebook and lifted her head. A faint smile flickered, barely visible, but full of meaning. She was used to being underestimated, and every time, it was the people who underestimated her who ended up losing the most. The older woman beside her whispered, "That was wrong of them." "I'm so sorry, dear," Alicia replied softly. "It's all right, ma'am. Some lessons can only be learned when people lose what they thought they'd always own." The plane sliced through the clouds, climbing higher into the sunlight. But below them, a different kind of storm was forming, not in the sky, but across the world of media and social networks. And still, Alicia sat there, hands folded, gaze distant, not because she'd been defeated, but because she was waiting for the perfect moment to turn humiliation into reckoning. At that moment, if anyone had truly looked at her, they wouldn't have seen a wrong passenger. They'd have seen a woman who understood the value of silence and the power that comes with it. She closed her eyes, smiling faintly. Outside, sunlight flared against the window, catching fire in her reflection. A flight had begun, and with it, a shift in power was taking off. As North Star Air Flight 278 leveled smoothly in the sky, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft gold. Passengers reopened laptops, ordered coffee, flipped through magazines as if nothing had happened. But for Alicia Monroe, every heartbeat had purpose. She wasn't angry. She was observing. Most people in her place might have demanded to see a manager, filed a complaint, or even deboarded the plane altogether. But Alicia never chose noise over precision. She knew humiliation only holds power if you let it control you. And she intended to turn every detail of that humiliation into evidence, every second into leverage. Sitting quietly in seat 18C, a seat meant for ordinary passengers, her hands rested neatly on her knees, her gaze on the window, her mind working like a finely tuned machine. She noted the slight tremor in Rachel's voice when she said operational priority. She remembered the evasive look in Jessica Barnes's eyes, the lid attendant who valued order more than fairness. And she filed away Gregory Hale's smug grin, his voice carrying across the cabin as he bragged about being a loyal VIP. Another woman might have seen it as personal insult. Alicia saw a pattern, one older than the people repeating it. And she understood to break such a system, anger wasn't enough. It required strategy. The plane trembled slightly as it reached cruising altitude. A different flight attendant passed by with a service card. "Would you like something to drink?" "Ma'am." "Just water." "Thank you." Her voice was steady, warm, not a hint of fatigue. The attendant had no idea that he was serving a woman who could, with one command, shut down every integrated system North Star Air depended on. Alicia set the glass down and opened her laptop. Instead of checking emails, she launched NovaLink's internal security platform and entered her executive clearance code. The screen pulsed softly. Protocol Sigma, pending activation. She paused. Not out of hesitation, but to give them one last chance to recognize themselves before the consequences did it for them. Sometimes, fairness wasn't about punishment. It was about allowing people to face the cost of their own choices. She looked around the cabin. No one met her eyes, but everyone knew. Some glanced her way, offering quick looks of sympathy. Others buried themselves in their screens, pretending ignorance. A few even smirked, as if to say, it was just a small mistake. Alicia smiled faintly. A small mistake. That's what they always called disrespect, trimming it down, polishing it until it felt easier to swallow. She didn't want their pity. She wanted their understanding. Taking out her phone, she typed a message to Evelyn Shaw, NovaLink's chief legal counsel, Eve. I need all discrimination claims filed against North Star Air in the past 3 years. Highest priority. No emojis, no punctuation marks for tone. Just a clean command, and Evelyn, who'd worked with Alicia long enough, knew what that meant. When Alicia's tone was calm, a storm was forming. Meanwhile, in row 17, the young software engineer Marcus still had his phone raised discreetly. He didn't know who the woman behind him was, only that what he'd witnessed was wrong. And some things shouldn't be buried. He uploaded a short clip to Twitter with a simple caption, "They just made a black woman give up her first-class seat for a white man." Email North Star Air racism is not over. Alicia didn't see it, but somehow she felt it. Every time someone refused to stay silent, even with just one tap on a screen, the world shifted an inch closer to justice. She turned slightly, measuring the distance between seat 1A and 18C. A short walk, but heavy with meaning. The space between being seen as deserving and being pushed aside for convenience. Throughout history, how many times had black people, women, or anyone deemed different, been made to travel that same distance not on an airplane, but in workplaces, schools, and the quiet corners of society? The woman beside her whispered, "You shouldn't let them treat you like that. I'd have made a scene." Alicia smiled gently. "I understand, but sometimes silence frightens people more than shouting ever could." Her seatmate looked at her in surprise. Alicia said no more, just turned the glass of water slowly in her hand. Reflected in it were the calm eyes of someone who knew real power didn't come from speaking first, but from choosing the right moment to speak at all. Moments later, Rachel walked by again. Their eyes met hers, flickered with guilt. Alicia gave a single, knowing nod. No accusation, no anger, just awareness. The pieces were already falling into place. In her mind, a thought formed, clean and sharp. Anger makes me like them. Calm makes them see themselves. Outside, the sky stretched endless and blue. The engine hum melted into the rhythm of her thoughts. She'd been here before in boardrooms, in meetings, in quiet humiliations others thought she'd forget. Every time she was underestimated, another door opened, not for her to walk through, but for others to see the smallness of their own behavior. Up front, Gregory Hale was still talking on his phone, laughing about how the airline always takes care of its best customers. Some passengers chuckled, others sighed. No one knew that. At that very moment, North Star Air's central servers received a silent signal from NovaLink's network protocol Sigma, standby mode active. Alicia opened her eyes, glanced at her hand on the keyboard. She hadn't pressed the button, not yet. But she knew if she did, every operational system the airline relied on could freeze in seconds. She didn't want destruction. She wanted remembrance. A lesson carved not in anger, but in clarity. Respect is not a privilege, it's an obligation. She exhaled softly, the faintest smile curving her lips. Her calm wasn't a mask. It was mastery. The understanding that sometimes true strength lies not in how you react to disrespect, but in when and how you choose to respond. A single droplet slid from her glass, rolling across the tray table. She watched it move slow, round, deliberate. Every action creates a ripple, she thought. The only question is whether you want that ripple to spread through anger or through wisdom. Outside, the aircraft floated through the clouds, silent and steady. Far below, Marcus's tweet began to spread. A new hashtag was being born, and with it, a reckoning was already waiting for North Star Air the moment Flight 278 touched down. The plane gave a faint shudder, just enough to make the glass of water on Alicia Monroe's tray tremble, ripples spreading gently across its surface. Alicia looked down at those small waves and smiled a quiet smile no one else could possibly understand. Outside, the clouds stretched in endless white layers. Inside, everything seemed calm again. But only Alicia knew this calm was the pause before real power began to move. Moments ago, she had chosen composure. Now, she was shifting into action silent, calculated, utterly controlled. She opened her laptop, the blue light reflecting across her serene face. A secure window blinked open. Secure channel, NovaLink systems. Her fingers moved swiftly, entering a triple-layer encryption code. A command dashboard unfolded filled with symbols only NovaLink insiders could decipher. In the corner glowed one line in soft green integration override, Sigma, with one tap. Alicia could freeze the entire data integration network between North Star Air and NovaLink systems, the platform that powered everything from flight coordination to passenger security. She wasn't a hacker. She was the architect. NovaLink was North Star's exclusive technology partner. Every server, every passenger app, every live data stream ran through the system she'd built. And buried deep in the contract, a line no one had paid much attention to, was this clause. In the event of a security or integrity threat, NovaLink retains full emergency override authority. That clause had never once been triggered, but if she wanted to, it would take just one click. Alicia glanced out the window and whispered, almost amused, "They think they demoted a passenger. They don't realize this plane is flying on my code." No one around her could have guessed that the quiet woman in row 18C held the technical lifeline of the second-largest airline in America. The irony was exquisite. The people who underestimated her were the ones most bound by her power. Her mind drifted back to the meeting 2 days earlier at NovaLink Seattle headquarters. 54 floors up, sunlight pouring through glass walls. David Morrison, Northstar's CEO, had shaken her hand, all polished charm and corporate ease. Alicia, we're lucky to have Stratus. Oh, sorry. NovaLink on board. This $700 million deal is a new era for both of us. She'd smiled then, polite, detached. Morrison had always spoken like a man convinced he was the stronger side of every equation. And now, as she sat in row 18C, that same smile returned, because arrogance always found its way home. Alicia scrolled through the integration dashboard. Her team called it the heart of the sky. It synchronized ground control, aircraft data, ticketing, and flight tracking. If that heart stopped beating, Northstar would flatline. No takeoffs, no check-ins, no data flow. She had no intention of destroying it, but she wanted them to remember who could. She'd always believed that true power wasn't about using force. It was about knowing you have it and choosing not to abuse it. Her phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn Shaw, her legal counsel. Located 14 discrimination complaints filed against Northstar in the past 24 months. Several remain unresolved internally. Confirm Sigma activation. Alicia studied the text for a long moment, then typed a single word standby, leaning back in her seat. She exhaled. There was no anger in her, only a deep, settled clarity. The kind found in people who had lived long enough among power to understand that sometimes silence speaks the loudest. Up front, Gregory Hale was still on the phone, his voice smug and cutting through the air. You won't believe it. They almost had me sitting in the back. Can you imagine some black woman in first class? Unreal. Right. Laughter followed, coarse, echoing. Alicia tilted her head, listening. Her face remained composed. She wasn't thinking about offense anymore. She was studying the mechanics of arrogance itself. They equated privilege with power. But she understood something deeper. Real power is the ability to control what happens after privilege collapses. A flight attendant passed by and met her eyes. He didn't know why, but something in her gaze made him uneasy. It wasn't confrontation. It was knowing, as though she could see straight through the thin layers society built between first class and everyone else. Alicia unlocked her phone and stared at her wallpaper, the NovaLink tower in Seattle, all glass and steel, reaching into the clouds. Beneath it, hundreds of engineers, analysts, and attorneys worked every day, all orbiting around her vision. She had built it herself over 17 years, from a 4-person startup into a technological empire powering the nation's skies. And now, that empire rested quietly in the hands of a woman told to move down a seat. She remembered her father's words, a schoolteacher from Atlanta who'd raised her with steady wisdom. You can stay silent, baby. Just never let them think you're weak. You're only waiting for the moment they realize who's really running the room. Alicia nodded softly, as if answering him across time. She switched on her phone's recorder, capturing every sound, the attendants' chatter, Hale's voice, the murmurs of bystanders. Evidence, not for revenge, but for change. In her notebook, she wrote one quiet line. When power rests in the right hands, justice doesn't need to shout. The plane jolted again, dipping through a patch of turbulence. A few passengers gasped. Alicia just looked out the window at the churning clouds and whispered to herself, "It's all right. Every flight passes through turbulence. So did my life." In that moment, Alicia's power was no longer a secret. It was a test of fate to see how she would wield it. Her hand hovered above the keyboard, still, like a conductor poised before the first note of a symphony. Outside, the world was blissfully unaware that within minutes, one keystroke could freeze every North Star air system, triggering the greatest crisis the airline had ever faced. But for now, in seat 18C, high above the clouds, Alicia simply closed her eyes and rested her head against the seat, because she knew every kind of power has its moment, and hers was drawing near. A faint tremor passed through the cabin, making the window shades flutter and sunlight scatter across the polished metal trim. Alicia Monroe sat perfectly still in seat 18C, eyes half closed, one hand resting lightly on her laptop keyboard as if listening to music. But she wasn't listening to melodies. She was listening to ego and to prejudice, laid bare just a few rows ahead. From first class came Gregory Hale's voice, steady and deliberate, each word cutting through the air. He didn't speak loudly, but loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. His tone wasn't careless. It was performed as if he wanted everyone to know how comfortable he was, saying what should have died out a century ago. You know what's wrong with tech these days. Gregory chuckled into his phone. It's chaos. Now everyone wants to be a CEO women, people of color all chasing hashtags instead of hard work. The world runs on discipline and order, not on social experiments. The cabin fell silent. A few uneasy breaths, averted eyes. No one spoke. An older man pretended to nap. A young woman bent lower over her phone, and Alicia opened her eyes, not with anger, but with a calm so sharp it could slice glass. Gregory kept talking, voice dripping with smug certainty. Have you heard of that company? NovaLink or something? Supposedly run by a black woman. PR stunt, obviously. I'm sure the real work's handled by men. Same as always. Alicia's lashes lowered again, her lips curving into a nearly invisible smile, the kind born not of amusement, but of recognition. It was a smile she had seen in her own reflection countless times, the quiet acknowledgement of knowing exactly what kind of world she lived in and how to outlast it. She didn't record him. She didn't write anything down. She didn't need to. Every word etched itself effortlessly into the memory of a woman who had spent a lifetime surviving rooms full of men just like him. She remembered her first meeting with North Star's board, walking into a sleek conference room and feeling the weight of a dozen curious stares, not for her title, but for her skin. One executive had even asked, "Are you the PR rep or the attorney for the CEO?" Alicia had simply replied, "No. I'm the person you're signing a $700 million deal with." Moments like that didn't make her angry anymore. They made her strategic, like a hunter tightening a bowstring in the dark. Now, in row 18C, she opened her small notebook and wrote one line. Men like him aren't hateful. They're pitiful because they don't realize when the world has already moved on. She lifted her gaze toward Gregory's silhouette. He laughed, gesturing for another glass of wine, basking in the invisible privilege that had always protected him. Sometimes his glance flicked toward her casual, appraising, the kind of look women like Alicia had felt 1,000 times. That quiet, unspoken assumption. You don't belong where I do. She didn't look away. Her eyes met his, calm and steady. Gregory faltered, looked down, a small, fleeting moment, but enough to shift the weight in the room. A soft ping vibrated in her jacket pocket. A message from Evelyn Shaw flashed on her phone. Internal North Star channels are picking up chatter about the passenger video. Hashtag North Star bias is trending. Should I intervene? Alicia read the message, then closed her laptop and exhaled. No need to intervene. The world was already doing what it always does when truth escapes confinement. It moves. Ahead, Gregory kept talking, now pontificating about unrealistic female leaders. The more women try to prove they're strong, he said, the more emotional they get. I tell my investors give them a chance. Sure, but never full control. Feelings always ruin logic. Someone in row 2 frowned, but like the others, said nothing. And that, Alicia thought, was the real disease, not prejudice itself, but the silence that let it breathe. She inhaled deeply, thinking, if they ever see what silence truly costs, maybe they'll stop worshiping it. Lifting her phone, she opened a secure note and typed mark subject hail. Behavioral pattern confirmed. It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping evidence of a mindset, a system, a rot she was preparing to confront the right way. Behind her, Marcus, the young software engineer, refreshed his feed. The tweet he'd posted, they just made a black woman give up her first-class seat for a white man. North Star racism is not over was now spreading fast. Likes and retweets climbed by the second. The story had left the cabin. It was already echoing across the world. Alicia didn't glance at her phone. She didn't need to. She knew viral outrage could wound a company, but it couldn't fix a system. For that, she needed action precise, lawful, and unstoppable. Gregory ended his call, reclining with a lazy grin of satisfaction. Alicia studied him one last time, not with hate, but with something close to pity. Pity for a man who still believed contempt was proof of control, never realizing it was the loudest confession of weakness. She opened her notebook again and added a final line. People reveal their true nature, not when they're weak, but when they think no one's watching. Closing it softly, she lifted her gaze to the glowing seatbelt sign. The plane was descending, one flight nearing its end and another storm, waiting below. Alicia leaned back, eyes fixed forward. In first class, Gregory Hale might have felt victorious one seat, one illusion of importance, one fleeting sense of superiority. But Alicia knew what awaited him. Within hours, when the video spread, when North Star's name trended for all the wrong reasons, when his words became headlines, he would learn what it feels like to lose the power he had abused. One flight, one moment, one lesson that would echo far beyond the clouds. Not everyone sitting in the front leads the way. Sometimes, the real power sits in row 18, silent, steady, and watching. The wheels clattered softly against the plane's metal floor, and the service chime rang through the cabin. Calm, routine, almost deceptively normal. But in that quiet, Alicia Monroe was no longer the woman who'd been humiliated and reassigned to seat 18C. She was now the one quietly shifting the balance of a world the arrogant still believed they ruled. As Gregory Hale leaned back in his seat, smirking at his victory, Alicia unlocked her phone and opened NovaLink Systems' private satellite network. The screen glowed pale blue, a single line pulsing across it. Encrypted channel, level 5 clearance required. She pressed her thumb to the scanner and entered a biometric code. The interface unfolded sleek, sterile, and absolutely under her control. Her face was calm, detached, because Alicia had learned long ago sometimes retaliation doesn't need an explosion. It just needs perfect timing. She navigated to Direct Message, Legal Division. The secure contact appeared Evelyn Shaw, General Counsel. NovaLink. Alicia's fingers moved with surgical precision, her tone and text as sharp as her will Eve. Pull all discrimination records filed against Northstar Air in the past 36 months. Activate Protocol Sigma Standby Only. Do not execute until my confirmation. 3 seconds later. The message was gone. A short command, but the kind that could start cracking a billion-dollar empire from the inside out. Leaning back, she closed her eyes. She didn't need to act yet. Rage could make noise. Strategy made impact. She wanted them to fall knowing exactly why. From first class. Gregory's voice floated back again, this time lower, laced with whine. That woman. Probably some mid-level employee who got promoted for optics. These people always play the victim card. Alicia didn't turn around. She simply tapped record. His words, every smug syllable, were captured. Not for revenge, but as proof, the kind of arrogance that statistics could never measure. Moments later, her phone vibrated. Evelyn's reply came fast, as though she'd been waiting for the order. Located 17 complaints, 4 deleted from internal servers, Protocol Sigma armed, standing by for directive. Alicia nodded to herself. This wasn't about ego anymore. It was about a system that needed to be held accountable. She opened another document, Contingency Report 700M Integration Deal. It detailed every clause of NovaLink's $700 million partnership with Northstar, including one tiny, overlooked provision. NovaLink reserves the right to suspend all integrations in the event of ethical or operational misconduct by the partner entity. She remembered David Morrison, Northstar's CEO, laughing when he'd signed it. Ms. Monroe. I'm sure we'll never have to use that. That smug confidence had stayed with her. And now she wondered if he'd still be smiling when one message from her could make his entire airline freeze like an engine in Arctic air. Alicia closed her laptop and looked out the window. The sun had dipped low, turning the clouds into molten gold. She thought, they still don't understand. Power isn't in titles or seats. It's in data, in code, in who can silence a system with one touch. Beside her, an elderly man glanced over with a kind smile. You seem busy, young lady. What line of work are you in? Technology, Alicia answered. We build what keeps people safe in the skies. That's wonderful, he said. The world needs more people like you. The simplicity of that statement warmed her more than she expected. Amid arrogance and bias, there were still voices of quiet decency, the kind that reminded her why she did this. Not for vengeance, for justice, for balance. Across the cabin, Marcus, the young engineer, stared at his phone. His tweet was exploding. 5,000 views, 12,000, 27,000. Comments poured in. Can't believe this still happens. Who is she? She looks familiar. Alicia didn't know yet, but she didn't need to. Social outrage could start the wave. She would shape the tide. Her eyes hardened with focus. She would rewrite the rules, not just for herself, but for everyone ever told to move back. She opened one last file. Sigma Protocol Interface. At the bottom of the screen, glowing softly. Status armed. Ready for activation. Once executed, full system lockdown. All Northstar integrations suspended. Impact 6,000 flights. 2.4 million passengers. 14 billion data packets. Alicia inhaled slowly. No, not yet. She needed to remember this feeling, the weight of power resting, waiting, disciplined, because she would use it only when it mattered most. Justice. She knew, wasn't about making others hurt. It was about making them understand the cost of what they once dismissed as no big deal. In her notebook, she wrote one final line. Retaliation is instinct. Reform is power. Then she closed it gently. The plane jolted again, a soft tremor before descent. Alicia leaned back, eyes closed, letting herself rest. She knew that within hours, executives at North Star's headquarters would see the alert protocol Sigma, standby detected, and the meetings, the panic, the denials, all of it would begin. But for now, Alicia sat quietly in seat 18C, just another passenger gazing at drifting clouds, serene and unreadable, because they had taken a first-class seat from her, and she now held an entire system that would make them bow. In the dimmed light of the business cabin, the hum of the engines filled the air steady, rhythmic, like the breath of a giant metal creature gliding through the sky. Alicia Monroe gently closed her leather notebook, her fingertip resting on the last written line, a quiet full stop to everything she had just set in motion. Somewhere far below, Evelyn Shaw was already pulling the records. Protocol Sigma stood armed and waiting, and one single signal from Alicia could disable North Star Air's entire operational system in minutes. But she hadn't done it. Not yet. She was waiting not out of hesitation, but because she believed truth deserved to be witnessed, not merely executed through lines of code. And fate, it seemed, had just arranged for that truth to unfold a few seats ahead of her. That young man, Marcus Bryant, 28, a software engineer from Chicago, was flying to Seattle to present at an AI conference. Marcus wasn't the confrontational type. He was careful, mild, one of those people who preferred to avoid trouble. But what he'd witnessed earlier, a black woman being asked to vacate her first-class seat so a white man could sit there and sneer, had shaken something awake inside him. Marcus turned slightly. Alicia was still there, calm, poised, silent, not defeated, just composed, as though untouched by it all. He thought, if it had been me, I'd have argued, I'd have shouted. How does she stay so still? The weight of that injustice pressed against his chest. His hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his phone. He opened the camera and lifted it toward the front. Through the lens, he caught Gregory Hale smug, sipping wine, lounging in the seat that had been reassigned to him like some prize. A flight attendant poured him another glass, while Alicia, the rightful occupant, sat quietly several rows back. Marcus hesitated. Then he pressed record. He didn't want to go viral. He didn't want fame. He just couldn't do nothing. His voice, soft but firm, was captured in the background. It's 2025, and this is how a major airline treats a black woman who paid for her first-class seat. North Star Air, you need to do better. He stopped recording, opened Twitter, and typed, "They just removed a black woman from first class to seat a white man instead. This is North Star Air. This is America. 2025. He attached the photo Alicia by the window, sunlight brushing across her face. The image was serene, yet unyielding quiet strength captured in a single frame. Then he hit post, and in that moment, a seed was planted on the internet. From behind him, Alicia lifted her gaze. She caught the subtle movement, saw the young man's nervous glance. She didn't need to ask. She knew. Their eyes met a single second of silent understanding. Her nod said, "I know what you did. Thank you." He nodded back a quiet promise in return. 10 minutes later, the plane's satellite Wi-Fi flickered online. Passengers began checking emails, scrolling through feeds, resuming normal flight routines. Except this time, one of the first trending posts to appear on screens was Marcus's tweet. A large social justice account picked it up and retweeted. Then a journalist. Then a tech blogger. One who had once profiled NovaLink systems looked closer and froze. "Wait," he wrote, adding to the retweet. "Isn't that Alicia Monroe, CEO of NovaLink Systems, the same company about to sign a $700 million deal with North Star Air?" And from that moment, everything exploded. Alicia didn't yet know. She was still reading a NovaLink internal memo when she noticed the Wi-Fi slowing, a telltale lag caused by surging traffic. Around her, passengers whispered. A few stole glances her way. A young woman 2 rows back gasped softly, "Oh my God, is that Alicia Monroe?" Alicia said nothing. She simply smiled, that same composed smile that needed no confirmation, no denial. Far below, in the North Star Air Communications Center, alarms began to light up across dashboards. A junior analyst called his supervisor, panic in his voice. "Sir, something's trending. A North Star bias just hit 20,000 tweets in 10 minutes. And it looks like their CEO is on one of our flights." A long pause, then the sound of a chair scraping violently. "What did you just say? The CEO up in the sky?" Alicia could almost feel the shift in the air, the hum of whispers, the curious looks, the tension between awe and realization. Yet instead of anger, she felt something astonishingly peaceful. She had always believed truth needed her to speak, but now she saw sometimes truth only needs someone else to see. She turned to Marcus and said quietly, "Did you know most great changes begin with small acts no one plans?" He nodded. "Voice low, I guess. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to tell the truth." "Exactly," she said. "And sometimes just one who's willing to listen." Outside the window, the sky glowed pale blue. The aircraft flew steady, but below, the digital storm had begun to rage. Tweets, articles, calls, alerts all converging on one name, Alicia Monroe. The woman North Star had asked to move, and she hadn't said a single word. She hadn't even touched Protocol Sigma. The world had done it for her. In that quiet, Alicia felt something profound. True power isn't always in the act. Sometimes it's in how you inspire others to act. She opened her notebook again and wrote one more line. Neat and deliberate. When a seed of justice is planted at the right moment, the entire system trembles. And somewhere far below, in a boardroom at North Star Air, David Morrison was being pulled from a meeting. The screen before him flashed with urgent notifications. North Star bias now trending, Narch 1. Alicia Monroe confirmed to board. Media inquiries, CNN, Reuters, AP all waiting. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above, in seat 18Z. Alicia smiled faintly. Because she had always known sometimes the smallest spark becomes an earthquake. High above the clouds, North Star Flight 278 cut smoothly through the sky, its passengers unaware that just a few thousand meters below, a storm was gathering. Not a storm of wind or rain, but of social media. When Marcus Bryant hit post, it seemed like a spontaneous act of conscience, a man choosing not to look away from injustice. But like a single pebble dropped into still water, the ripples began to spread, and nothing could stop them. At first, the tweet drew a few hundred likes. 10 minutes later, a few thousand. Within half an hour, over 100,000 shares. Not just because of the outrage it provoked, but because of who was in the photo. A Twitter user named TechLens Daily made the connection first, posting, "Hold on, isn't that Alicia Monroe, CEO of NovaLink Systems, the same company in a $700 million partnership with North Star Air?" That one question was all it took. The spark hit gasoline. Soon, the flood of posts began. If that's true, North Star's done. They just humiliated the woman who literally controls their systems. How is this still happening in America? 2025. Within an hour, the hashtag North Star bias hit #1 nationwide. On Reddit, TikTok, LinkedIn, the story was everywhere. But what gripped people most wasn't just the discrimination. It was Alicia's composure. One comment read she didn't yell. She didn't fight back. She just sat there calm, steady. That's the look of someone who knows exactly where the real power lies. In seat 18C. Alicia was still unaware of the wildfire below, but she could feel the shift in the air, the glances that lingered, changing from indifference to curiosity, then quiet respect. A passenger leaned over. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Monroe?" She smiled softly. Just a passenger, like everyone else. But the internet disagreed. At North Star Air headquarters in Seattle, chaos broke loose. Red alerts blinked across the media dashboard. CEO David Morrison was in a strategy meeting when his communications director burst in, waving an iPad. "Sir, you need to see this. Right now." Morrison frowned and froze. On the screen was Alicia Monroe's face, the same woman he'd toasted 2 days earlier as their golden partner. Beneath it, a headline that would haunt him. North Star Air removes black female CEO from first-class seat to prioritize white passenger. Silence fell. The room thickened with dread. Within minutes, an emergency meeting was called. On the 42nd floor, legal and PR teams clashed. "We have to release a statement. Call it a misunderstanding." "Are you insane?" "That's NovaLink's CEO. One wrong word and she could terminate our integration contract. We should apologize publicly. No one says a word until I understand what the hell happened." Morrison barked, but the internet didn't wait for his understanding. Within 2 hours, The Washington Post, Tech Review, and The Atlantic were all running the headline. TV anchors requested statements. North Star Air, once a symbol of prestige, had become a case study in corporate arrogance. Business now published a biting editorial in trying to prioritize a first-class passenger. North Star forgot that the woman they downgraded was the one who could shut down their entire system. And on LinkedIn, CEOs and executives began sharing the story, captioned sober and cutting a billion-dollar lesson in humility. Respect isn't a courtesy, it's a survival strategy. Back on the plane, Marcus Bryant stared at his phone in disbelief. The notifications wouldn't stop. Messages flooded in. "You did the right thing. Thank you for recording that." He looked toward Alicia, the woman at the center of it all. She was still sitting quietly, untouched by the chaos she had unknowingly ignited. Her calmness made him feel both admiration and awe. The plane shuddered gently as it began its descent. Golden light from the setting sun bathed Alicia's face, calm and radiant. Her phone buzzed with a single notification. "Your name is trending nationwide. North Star bias." She stared at the words, expression unreadable. Not surprised, simply aware. Perhaps even moved by how justice sometimes finds its own voice. She opened her notebook again, beneath the line she'd written earlier. "Retaliation is instinct, reform is power," and added one more truth. When set free, doesn't need a leader, it leads itself. As the wheels prepared to touch down, Alicia knew nothing would ever be the same again for her, for North Star, for everyone who had ever mistaken power for privilege. And across millions of screens, people paused to ask themselves, if I had been on that flight, would I have stayed silent, or would I have spoken up in that moment? North Star bias wasn't just a trending tag. It had become a national reckoning, a mirror held up to conscience. And Alicia Monroe, the woman stripped of her seat, had quietly reclaimed the seat of power, not with anger, but with grace and clarity. The service cart rolled softly down the aisle, its wheels clicking faintly against the cabin floor, a small, ordinary sound swallowed by the steady hum of the engines. But inside North Star Flight 278, the atmosphere had shifted. The usual calm of a long-haul flight had been replaced by something else, a quiet tension, humming beneath the surface like static before a storm. Alicia Monroe lifted her eyes from her phone. She didn't need Wi-Fi to know what was happening below the clouds. The murmurs, the side glances, the flickers of screens, they told her everything. People were whispering, scrolling, staring, and all those glances were landing on her, the black woman in seat 18C. Up front in first class, Jessica Barnes, the lead flight attendant, tried to keep her composure, but even through the layers of perfect makeup, a trace of worry was breaking through. Beside her, the younger attendant, Rachel Martinez, leaned in and whispered, voice trembling, "Jess, have you seen the news about her, the woman in 18C? It's trending." Jessica froze. Trending. "What do you mean?" Rachel swallowed hard. "They're saying she's the CEO of NovaLink Systems. And the video, the one from earlier, it's all over Twitter." For a few seconds, Jessica just stood there, paralyzed. Her mind replayed the last 2 hours, Gregory Hale's condescending tone, her own decision to follow procedure, and Alicia's unnervingly calm expression. And suddenly, a cold realization settled in. This wasn't just a customer issue. She'd crossed the wrong person. Jessica fumbled for the crew tablet and opened the airline's internal communication system, only to find an error message flashing in, red system overload. Access restricted. "What the hell?" she muttered, typing again. Rachel peeked at the screen, her voice shaking. "It might be the servers. People are saying this story's everywhere now." Meanwhile, down in Seattle, inside the glass tower of North Star Air headquarters, CEO David Morrison was leaving an investor meeting when his phone started buzzing uncontrollably. Call after call. Urgent messages. Then his assistant's panicked voice cut through the line. "Mr. Morrison, we have a problem. A big one. The video from Flight 278 is going viral. And the woman in it, it's Alicia Monroe, the CEO of NovaLink Systems." Morrison stopped dead, his face drained of color. "Alicia Monroe," he repeated, as if the name itself couldn't be real. "Yes, sir. And North Star bias is trending #1 nationwide. The press is already reaching out." Before he could respond, his desktop monitor flashed with a new alert. Incoming email. Urgent security notification from NovaLink Systems. He clicked, and his heart sank. Subject protocol Sigma activated. System lockdown in progress. Below. The message was short, terrifyingly short. Temporary suspension of all North Star Air integrated data operations per Clause 14C. Ethical breach response. Contact CEO Monroe directly for reinstatement. Morrison shot to his feet. "Oh my God, they've shut us down." Within minutes, the entire building erupted into chaos. IT teams ran through hallways, shouting into headsets. A systems manager yelled from across the control floor, "We've lost access to the flight ops center. We can't update routes or load passenger data." Morrison gripped his phone, barking orders. "Get Alicia Monroe on the line now." But high above the clouds, Alicia sat quietly by the window, the sky blazing orange beyond the glass. The plane flew steady, calm. Yet somewhere between the earth and the heavens, the balance of power had shifted. Rachel approached, voice barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, may I apologize to you?" Alicia turned, her gaze steady, kind but unflinching. "You don't need to apologize to me. Ms. Martinez, just stay calm. You'll need that soon." The words sent a chill through Rachel's spine. Alicia looked away again, serene as ever. But she knew deep down that Protocol Sigma had already activated. Not because she commanded it, but because NovaLink's emergency ethics trigger had automatically detected a public discrimination incident connected to a corporate partner. It was a safeguard she had designed herself years ago. Now it was working exactly as intended. In Seattle, the operations screens flickered in and out, flight data frozen, communications between pilots and command briefly severed. A manager shouted over the chaos, "If we can't restore control in 10 minutes, we'll have to ground all domestic flights." Morrison slammed his fist on the table. "Find Monroe. Find her, whatever it takes." A shaken PR officer spoke up, voice barely audible. Sir, she's on one of our planes." The room went silent. Morrison stared at him. "On our plane." "Yes, sir. Flight 278. New York to Seattle." The silence deepened, heavy as lead. Then Morrison exhaled, voice hollow. "We just took the first-class seat away from the woman who controls our entire system." "Up in the air." Jessica Barnes gripped her seat armrest. The cabin buzzed with hushed panic. Passengers were whispering, checking their phones. "Is it true?" one man said loudly. "That woman's the tech CEO they're talking about online." The murmurs rippled through the rows. Rachel's hands trembled. "Jess, do you think we're going to lose our jobs?" Jessica didn't answer. Her eyes drifted toward 18C where Alicia sat, still, silent, unreadable. And in that silence, Jessica understood something painful. This was no longer about one mistake. It wasn't just poor service or a bad decision. It was an entire system being forced to face the truth about itself. From the cockpit, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ops Center isn't responding. Looks like a communications issue. Something's off." Jessica sat down, heart pounding. She knew the plane was safe, but everything else wasn't. Their careers, the airline's reputation, the company's future, all were in free fall. Meanwhile, Alicia watched the clouds burn red in the fading light. Her reflection shimmered in the glass, calm, resolute. There was no triumph in her eyes, no hint of vengeance, only the quiet recognition that what was happening was bigger than her. This wasn't revenge, it was reckoning. She whispered softly, almost to herself. It's time they remembered what respect really means. The steady hum of North Star Flight 278 carried on above the clouds but far below. In the digital arteries of North Star Air, the system was collapsing like a skyscraper with its foundations ripped away, all because of one line of code. One cold, clinical command protocol Sigma activated. At the airline's operations center in Seattle, dozens of massive monitors went gray all at once. Then, across the wall of screens, a crimson message appeared. System access denied. Integration link suspended by NovaLink systems. A technician shot up from his chair. "We've lost connection to the entire flight control network." Chaos erupted. Phones rang nonstop. Voices overlapped. Keyboards clattered in panic. A shift manager yelled, "No route updates. Passenger data is frozen across all flights." Within 15 minutes, over 60 domestic flights were grounded. Thousands of passengers stranded from Dallas to Denver to New York. Pilots radioed in, unable to load manifests or confirm departure times. At headquarters, CEO David Morrison struggled to contain the chaos. His once impeccable boardroom, a place of order and control, had turned into a command post under siege. Every monitor, every system, flashed the same denial message. "Can we restore access?" he barked. The lead systems engineer shook his head. Pale. "Sir, no." The shutdown came from NovaLink's main server. "It's not an internal fault. It's a full lockout." Morrison's jaw tightened. What about the contingency clause in the contract that only applies to technical failures, not ethical breach triggers? And the system tag right now is ethical breach. The room went dead silent. Those two words. Ethical breach carried more weight than any malfunction. It wasn't just a technical freeze. It was a corporate indictment. Morrison slammed his fist on the table. Damn it. We're being punished while 42,000 passengers are in the air. Just then, the head of PR, Linda Gray, burst in, phone in hand, face ashen. David, it's everywhere. CNBC, Reuters, the New York Times. They've confirmed the woman removed from first class was Alicia Monroe. Morrison froze. The realization hit like a punch to the chest. She's on our plane, he said slowly, and we're the ones who humiliated her. Linda nodded. If we don't act now, the stock's going to crash. Too late. On the trading floor, Northstar Air NSA shares had already plunged 8% in 30 minutes. Analysts were calling it an ethical earthquake. One anchor on Finance Live summed it up bluntly. Northstar isn't suffering a system outage. It's suffering a moral one. You can reboot software. You can't reboot trust. Upstairs, the boardroom descended into shouting. How did no one know Monroe was on our own flight? Because no one's trained to see who's in front of them, just what color they are. The word silenced the room. In that moment, David Morrison understood the true disaster wasn't the shutdown. It was exposure a mirror held up to their arrogance. He sank into his chair and muttered, "Get me Alicia Monroe." His assistant hesitated. "Sir, she's mid-air. We can't reach her." Morrison closed his eyes, exhaling like a man awaiting judgment. Above him, the woman they'd asked to move now held the power to stop their entire world. On Flight 278, tension rippled through the cabin. Jessica and Rachel moved briskly up the aisle, exchanging worried looks as passengers read the breaking news on their phones. Northstar stock plunges, dozens of flights grounded nationwide. Northstar bias remains Dharmshawan trending. An elderly woman leaned toward Alicia, whispering, "They're saying you run the company that just shut them down." "Is that true?" Alicia smiled gently. "I just believe sometimes things need to stop so people can finally see themselves clearly." The woman nodded slowly. "You did right, dear. Not everyone can stay silent and still be strong." Alicia smiled faintly, her eyes drifting back to the window. Down below, headlines blazed and stock tickers bled red. But she felt no triumph, only a deep stillness. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning through reflection, letting the system collapse under its own weight. Back in Seattle, Northstar's board convened another emergency session. "We need to apologize publicly." One member insisted, "Apologize to Monroe." "She's cost us hundreds of millions," another snapped. Then Linda Gray spoke, her voice steady. "She didn't cost us a thing. She just took off the mask we've been hiding behind." No one argued. By evening, the media had dubbed it the flight that changed corporate ethics. Investors demanded Morrison appear on national television, but he couldn't move. He sat alone in his office, staring at the glowing red words on his monitor. Protocol Sigma, active, awaiting owner response. Only one person could unlock their salvation, the woman they dismissed. Oh. At 30,000 feet, Alicia closed her notebook. The aircraft began its descent, and as the engine softened to a hum, she understood. When the wheels touched down, it wouldn't just be the end of a flight. It would be the beginning of a new balance of power. The jet engines slowed, their steady hum fading into a hush. The late afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows of Northstar 278, tinting everything in gold and amber, serene on the surface. But beneath that calm, a storm was waiting to break. Alicia Monroe opened her eyes as the captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, We're beginning our descent into Seattle International Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts." She smiled faintly, not because the flight was ending, but because she knew a new chapter was about to begin. In first class, Jessica Barnes, the chief flight attendant, checked her passenger list with trembling hands. Her intercom buzzed nonstop. Messages from headquarters flashed on screen. Urgent. Confirm if CEO NovaLink Systems is on Flight 278. If yes, issue a public apology immediately. Do not act independently. Media crews are waiting on the runway. Jessica swallowed hard. Around her, passengers were whispering, phones recording. They could sense something was happening, and she, who thought she had only followed procedure, now realized she was part of the storm. The plane touched down with a heavy thud and a long screech of brakes. No one moved. Everyone seemed to know the story wasn't over. Alicia sat still in seat 18C, hand resting on her bag, eyes on the window. She wasn't in a hurry. People who truly understand their power never are. "Up front," Jessica hesitated, then gathered her courage and walked down the aisle. Rachel Martinez followed, eyes red. At row 18, Jessica stopped, took a breath, and said softly, "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were." Alicia turned. Her calm voice weighted like stone. "You didn't know who I was, or you didn't think I could be who I am." Jessica froze. There was no answer that sounded right. Silence fell. Some passengers raised their phones. Others just stared. Alicia rose, adjusted her blazer, and began walking toward the front, unhurried, composed, every step echoing through the cabin. Midway up the aisle, she stopped, facing Jessica, Rachel, and Gregory Hale, the man still ducking his head in shame. Her voice was low and even, yet every word cut clear through the air. "Before I leave this plane, you should know who you asked to give up seat 1A. No one breathed. I am Alicia Monroe, CEO of NovaLink Systems, the company responsible for every integrated platform Northstar Air relies on." Gasps rippled. Someone whispered, "My God." Alicia's gaze swept the cabin, not with anger, not with contempt, but as if forcing everyone to truly see. Hours ago, Northstar's system shut down. Right now, people on the ground are begging me to restore access. The irony. While they panic, I'm sitting here in 18C, the seat they thought belonged to just another black passenger. Jessica's eyes filled. Rachel looked down. Alicia stepped closer, her tone still steady. "I'm not saying this to humiliate anyone. I want you to understand the number on a seat doesn't define class. It only reflects how a system chooses to see people." A single clap broke the silence from an older man in row 7. Then another. Within seconds, the cabin filled with applause, echoing off the metal walls. Alicia didn't bow, didn't smile. She simply stood there, unshaken, letting everyone grasp that this wasn't fury, but justice realized in quiet form. Gregory Hale lifted his head, face flushed. I didn't know who you were. If I had Alicia cut him off gently, if you had, you'd have treated me differently. Then you still don't understand." He had no reply. Alicia nodded once. Her final words were soft, but each syllable landed like a pin on glass. "You all misunderstood who was really sitting in 18C. Phones captured every second. Within minutes, those videos were streaming online, millions watching live." Alicia stepped through the aircraft door into a wall of flash bulbs. She didn't pause. To the first reporter, she said quietly, "I'm not looking for attention. I'm asking people to look at one another more fairly." Another shouted, "Will you restore Northstar Systems?" She smiled. They'll have to learn to ask the right person. And then she walked on tall, composed, through the crowd and the blaze of lights. That image, a calm black woman leaving the plane that had tried to diminish her, spread across every news channel that night. They called it the 18C moment, not because it was a lowly seat, but because it reminded the world that real power doesn't always sit in the front. It lives in those strong enough not to prove where they belong. The airplane door opened to a flood of Seattle sunlight. A rush of cold wind swept through the cabin, carrying the smell of jet fuel and the noise of the tarmac. Alicia Monroe stepped out of North Star 278, her posture steady, her gaze distant. Behind her, the cabin erupted in applause, deep, sustained, and full of emotion. No one had to say a word. Passengers of every color, every age, stood together not just for a woman who stood up for herself, but for an awakening they had just witnessed. They knew they'd seen history not on a screen, but right there, 30,000 feet above the ground. One young passenger was live-streaming the scene. Within minutes, over 100,000 people were watching. The clapping, the tearful faces, the faint smile on Alicia's lips had spread across social media like wildfire through dry grass. Outside, reporters crowded the gate. As Alicia walked down the jet bridge, flashes lit up like a storm of stars. One journalist shouted above the noise, "Ms. Monroe, is it true you triggered Protocol Sigma, the reason North Star's entire system went offline?" Alicia paused, turned toward the cameras. Her voice was soft, calm, but it carried a gravity that made the crowd fall silent. "I didn't shut down anything. The system simply responded to the values it was designed to protect: ethics and human respect." That single sentence became the top trending quote on Twitter and CNN within minutes. Meanwhile, at North Star Air headquarters, the mood was grim, the silence that follows a storm. David Morrison, the CEO, sat motionless in his office, staring at the rolling headlines on the screen. Alicia Monroe exits flight to standing ovation. North Star Air faces unprecedented corporate crisis. The door burst open. Linda Gray, head of PR, entered clutching a thick folder. Voice hoarse. "Stocks down 11.4% in 3 hours. David, the board's calling an emergency session. The FAA just issued a formal inquiry. They're demanding full crew records, including Jessica Barnes and Rachel Martinez." Morrison pressed his fingers to his temples. "God," he whispered. He had once called North Star a model of progress. Now it was collapsing in his hands. Elsewhere, Gregory Hale, the man who had been granted Seat 1A, was intercepted by airport security before he could leave the terminal. One officer handed him a document. Notice of indefinite suspension of flight privileges pending investigation. Gregory exploded. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just took the seat they gave me." But nearby passengers recognized him, whispering, filming. "That's him. The guy who took her seat." The murmurs spread fast, like invisible needles pricking through his $1,000 suit. Gregory lowered his head and walked away, his former arrogance gone. Inside North Star's glass tower, the boardroom meeting was chaos. Red graphs bled down the big screen. "We're bleeding hundreds of millions," one board member shouted. "Who's accountable?" Another answered coldly. "The man we put in first class and the woman we humiliated holds our survival in her hands." Linda Gray placed her folder on the table. "We have 2 options," she said. "One, terminate the entire crew, issue a full public apology, and beg Ms. Monroe to restore the system. 2, deny everything and watch the stock drop another 20% by morning." Silence. Morrison looked down at his trembling hands, hands that once commanded everything. now powerless. Finally, he spoke quietly. "Do it. Fire them. Write the apology. Make it public. I'll sign it." That night, the headlines broke. Jessica Barnes and Rachel Martinez were terminated for conduct violations damaging to corporate image. Gregory Hale was permanently banned from North Star flights and stripped of elite status. North Star Air shares closed down 11.7%. The FAA launched a full-scale discrimination probe. CNN, NBC, Reuters, and AP all led with the story. Analysts debated corporate ethics live on air. But through the noise, one video kept playing again and again, Alicia standing in the aisle, saying, "You all misunderstood who was sitting in seat 18. That line, the 18C moment, became a global symbol of power, turned inside out. Late that night, Morrison sat alone in his office. Outside, Seattle glowed. Inside, the only light came from his monitor replaying Alicia's calm, cutting words. There was no anger in her tone, only a quiet authority that made him feel small. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed. "Hello, this is the office of Alicia Monroe. For contract or system restoration inquiries, please email your request." The automated message ended. He lowered the phone, head in his hands, and in that stillness, he understood. Real power doesn't come from commanding others. It comes from the one person who can bring an empire to its knees by saying nothing at all. As for Alicia, she didn't linger at the airport. A NovaLink car took her straight to her hotel. In the front seat, Evelyn Shaw, her legal advisor, turned and asked, "Are you planning to restore their system?" Alicia smiled faintly, eyes on the glittering city outside. "Not yet. I want them to feel what it's like to lose control, the same control they used against others." Evelyn nodded slowly. "The media's calling you the face of serene justice." Alicia chuckled softly. "I don't need to be a symbol. I just want them to remember respect isn't a privilege. It's the baseline." She leaned back, closing her eyes. The city buzzed on, but inside her, there was only quiet. The next morning, headlines read, "North Star Air from prestige to a lesson in humanity. The woman in 18C who made the skies more equal." And for those who'd been on that flight, those who saw her humiliated, then rise, they all said the same thing. The most powerful thing Alicia Monroe ever did wasn't speak. It was the way she stayed silent and let the truth speak for itself. The next morning, Seattle was damp and gray under a fine mist of rain, a chill that seemed to seep into the glass tower bearing the North Star Air logo. The headlines from the night before were still spreading like waves. The entire country was talking about the 18C moment. Major news channels replayed that same clip again and again. Alicia Monroe, standing in the middle of the aircraft cabin, calm and resolute, introducing herself as the CEO of NovaLink Systems and declaring you all misunderstood who was sitting in seat 18. But today wasn't about collapse anymore. Today was the final test to see whether North Star Air could learn something from the storm it had brought upon itself. In the NovaLink office, the morning light reflected off polished oak. Alicia sat at her desk, the coffee in front of her gone cold. Her screen glowed with headline after headline about North Star's downfall. Evelyn Shaw, her legal counsel, stood nearby, voice quiet but firm. "They've sent 3 formal apologies. The board's also requesting a face-to-face meeting to renegotiate the contract." Alicia said nothing. She hadn't spoken a word since leaving the airport the night before. Her gaze was distant, not angry, but measured. Finally, she spoke, slowly and clearly. "Evelyn, I'll give them 48 hours. Evelyn looked up. 48 hours, for what Alicia's tone hardened slightly, to prove they still deserve to work with us. Not through words, through actions. She set the cup down and stared at the rotating North Star Air logo on her monitor. If they can't, within 48 hours, we'll terminate the partnership permanently and migrate every integrated system to Atlas Aviation. Evelyn nodded. She understood this was no longer a business decision. It was a moral test. Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor of North Star headquarters, David Morrison stood by the window, looking down at rain-slicked streets. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. The pressure from the board, investors, the FOO, and the media weighed heavy on him. But what haunted him most was Alicia Monroe's silence. Linda Gray entered, holding a memo. "David, NovaLink just sent an official notice. They're giving us 48 hours to prove our ethical value or we lose the contract." Morrison exhaled, lowering himself into a chair. 48 hours. Either we save this company or we disappear. An emergency board meeting was called that same morning. 12 people sat around the long table. Gone were the smug tones of authority. Only the rustle of papers and the sound of anxious breathing remained. Linda spoke first. "We need actions, not promises. I propose forming an independent oversight council for diversity and ethics, with unrestricted access to all internal records." One member objected. "That's basically inviting outsiders to control us." Linda's response was sharp, immediate. "Exactly, because without oversight, we'll slip right back to where we were. And where we were is what got us here." Morrison scanned the room. He saw tired faces, some fearful, but among the younger staff. He noticed something else: determination. They want change, he thought, and maybe I need to want it too. He rose from his seat, voice steady. "I'll sign any commitment proving North Star is ready to change. We'll create a new position, Chief Diversity and Equality Officer, reporting directly to me." Someone hesitated. "Are you sure, David? That position will have veto power over senior hiring decisions?" He nodded. "I'm sure. If we don't do this, nothing changes. From now on, I take personal responsibility. If this program fails, I'll resign." The room fell silent. No one spoke. That afternoon, North Star announced the 48-hour reform initiative. At first, the media was skeptical, but when the details emerged, public opinion began to shift. An independent oversight council, led by acclaimed black scholar Dr. Naomi Carter, would monitor every diversity and ethics policy. In May, a new Chief Diversity and Equality Officer position was opened for public application, with full authority over hiring, training, and discrimination review. All 28,000 employees would undergo mandatory ethics and inclusion training within 30 days. Morrison personally signed a 12-page accountability commitment, sending it directly to NovaLink with a handwritten note. "If North Star fails to uphold this pledge, I take full responsibility, including stepping down." Sentence. That evening at NovaLink, Alicia read the document quietly. Evelyn waited, watching her face. Alicia folded the papers and placed them on the desk. Her tone was soft, almost like a sigh. "He understands now." Evelyn frowned slightly. Understands what Alicia looked toward the window, where Seattle's neon lights shimmered through the mist. That sometimes, to save a company, You have to start by saving its soul." She turned back, voice calm and resolute. "We'll restore the system, but only after the 48 hours are complete. I want to see if they act on their words." 2 days later, 47 hours and 26 minutes after the notice was sent, Morrison received an email from NovaLink system access restored, protocol Sigma terminated. At the same time, a new statement appeared on North Star Air's homepage. "We cannot change the past, but we can choose how to take responsibility for the present." Thousands of comments poured in, not out of forgetfulness, but out of recognition. People could see genuine effort. Alicia read the update in silence. She didn't smile. She simply sent a brief message to Evelyn. "We gave them a chance. Now, let's see what they do with it." Then she closed her laptop and stood. On her desk lay her old North Star boarding pass, the small print in the corner reading Seat 18C. She brushed her hand over it, part farewell, part closure. On the afternoon of the second day, 46 hours after the 48-hour ultimatum had been sent, a soft rain swept across the NovaLink Systems headquarters. Seattle rain was never heavy. It simply blurred the windows, making the city lights outside shimmer like trembling reflections. Inside the operations room, the main monitor lit up with a single, powerful line of text. "Protocol Sigma. Terminated. System access restored." No one cheered. No one clapped. There were only quiet looks exchanged, the kind that said everyone in the room understood. This moment wasn't about victory. It was about closure. Alicia Monroe sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the glowing words. She didn't smile. She only nodded as if to confirm that justice doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it only needs resolve. Across the city, David Morrison finally exhaled as North Star's systems came back online. Numbers on the dashboard steadied, flights resumed, and schedules aligned. But he knew the real loss wasn't digital or financial. It was honor or reputation dragged through the mud by their own hands. The media narrative shifted almost overnight. Instead of criticism, people began calling Alicia the face of calm integrity and power. The Atlantic ran a feature titled, "The Woman Who Made an Entire Airline Industry Re-Examine Itself." And the New York Times headlined, "When the one you look down on holds the key to your future." D'Aturto. But justice, as Alicia often said, doesn't end with forgiveness. It ends with accountability. 3 days later, Bloomberg broke another story. Gregory Hale, the man who had taken Alicia's first-class seat, was sued by NovaLink for defamation and damages to business relations, a claim totaling $500,000. The Seattle Civil Court ruled swiftly. Gregory sought mediation. NovaLink refused. Soon after, the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) announced a 5-year industry ban on Gregory Hale, prohibiting him from working in or with any aviation or aerospace technology companies. It wasn't revenge. It was moral consequence, the closing sentence in a story about what happens when privilege goes unchecked. In an interview with NBC, NovaLink's attorney said one line that made the nation pause. "No one is punished for making a mistake. They're punished when they refuse to learn from it." Meanwhile, another story, quieter but warmer, began to unfold. Marcus Bryant, the young engineer who filmed the plane incident, received a call from NovaLink headquarters. Alicia herself wanted to meet him. The meeting was simple, just the two of them in a small conference room. Alicia sat across from him, her gaze steady and kind. "I've watched your video at least 10 times, she said. "You didn't just record a moment, you witnessed it, and you acted. Sometimes The world needs more people who refuse to stay silent. Marcus hesitated. I just thought, if I didn't, no one would believe what really happened. Alicia nodded and slid an envelope across the table. Inside was an official offer letter. Director of Community Tech Initiatives, she explained. We're launching a program to fight discrimination within corporate and tech spaces. I want you to lead it. Not because you filmed that moment, but because you understand what silence costs. Marcus took a breath and smiled. I won't let you down, Ms. Monroe. Don't do it for me, Marcus, she said softly. Do it for everyone who's ever had to sit in seat 18C. No. Marcus's story spread quickly. Within weeks, NovaLink launched Tech for Equity, a community initiative providing scholarships and career training for Black and underrepresented students in technology. The press began calling it the legacy of 18C. As for North Star Air, the following days were filled with rebuilding. Morrison kept his word introducing the Clean Sky program, a full-scale transparency and ethics reform. Public anger began to soften, but the memory remained. Every time someone mentioned North Star, they said, that's the airline that kicked a CEO out of first class and learned how to bow after it. One quiet weekend evening, Alicia sat in her office bathed in warm light. She opened her email, hundreds of messages from strangers thanking her. One read, I was once rejected because they said my face didn't fit the company's image. Thank you for standing up for people like me. She didn't reply. She simply saved it. Evelyn walked in, holding a cup of ginger tea. They're calling you the Woman of Silent Justice of the Year, she said with a small smile. Alicia chuckled lightly. I don't need a title. I just need people to understand justice isn't a shout. It's how you choose to stand when others tell you to sit. She rose and gazed out the window. Below, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Her thoughts drifted to Marcus, to the passengers on that flight, to Jessica and Rachel, who, she hoped, were relearning the first lesson of their profession. Respect isn't protocol, it's humanity. Downstairs, Marcus had just wrapped up the first meeting of Tech for Equity. He looked around at the eager faces students, engineers, young innovators, and smiled. In his pocket, he still kept one old boarding pass, the one marked Seat 18C. He never forgot that day. Not because of the humiliation, but because that was the day he witnessed a woman who chose not to fight with anger, but with intellect. When the lawsuits were finally settled, when the headlines faded and Alicia Monroe's photo no longer filled the front pages of national newspapers, the real story wasn't in the silence that followed, it was in what truly changed after the storm. Because, as Alicia once told her counsel, Evelyn Shaw, real justice isn't about who wins. It's about whether the system learns from the fall it caused itself. Just 1 month after the Seat 18C incident, North Star Air announced a new program called the Open Skies Initiative, a sweeping plan to rebuild trust and reform company culture. At the center of it was the North Star Horizon Fund, a $2 million annual scholarship for Black students pursuing careers in aviation, engineering, and information technology. At the press conference, CEO David Morrison appeared noticeably older. He came without a spokesperson, without polished corporate language, only a single page in his trembling hands. He spoke slowly. We can't erase what happened, but we can begin again by investing in the people we once, perhaps unknowingly, excluded. The room went silent. Then came the applause, quiet, but genuine. The media called it a rare moment when a corporation chose to bow its head. But Alicia wasn't interested in applause. That same day, Morrison sent her a handwritten letter, something almost antique in an age of email. The penmanship was uneven, brief. With your permission, we'd like to redirect your personal compensation settlement estimated at $1.2 million into the Horizon Fund. In your name. Alicia read it once, then set it down with a faint smile. Evelyn, sitting across from her, asked, "You'll accept it, won't you? After everything, they owe you that." Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't need payment for humiliation. I need them to pay with change." Then she picked up her pen and wrote beneath Morrison's message in firm, elegant strokes. "I decline personal compensation. Please direct the full amount toward training reform and scholarships, because if someday a young woman of color sits in seat 1A without being doubted for the shade of her skin, that will be the reward I wanted." News of her decision spread quickly. A tech journal ran the headline, "The woman who turned down $1.2 million to restore dignity for the next generation." Evening talk shows began discussing the Alicia effect as corporations from airlines to tech giants re-examined their ethics training and diversity pipelines. Several companies signed a new corporate diversity and accountability pledge, quoting Alicia's now iconic line, "Sometimes real power comes from calm, not from shouting." 6 months later, spring arrived, bringing with it a new kind of air. The integrated NovaLink North Star system was finally complete. Delayed, yes, but now stronger, safer, and more transparent than ever before. At the signing ceremony, David Morrison personally visited NovaLink headquarters. He moved slowly, humbly. When he met Alicia, he said, "Thank you. I've learned what true power is not the kind that comes from title, but the kind that makes others look inward." Alicia replied simply, "Don't thank me. Thank the people who stayed silent before me. I just happened to be the one who spoke at the right time." They shook hands. No photographers, no cameras, just two people, standing in soft light, both aware that sometimes the greatest business lessons aren't written in numbers, but in awakenings. Afterward, as Alicia left the building, a North Star staff member caught up to her, holding out a ticket and invitation to the company's first restored commercial flight. "Ms. Monroe, the board would be honored to have you as our guest of honor on the inaugural flight." Alicia paused, looked at the ticket, the seat number 1A printed in bold. She smiled, shook her head, and handed it back. "Thank you, but I don't need to go back to a place that once didn't want me there. I'm already flying in my own way." The employee hesitated, then nodded quietly. That evening, Alicia sat in her small apartment overlooking Lake Union. On her tablet, a headline from Business Chronicle glowed softly. North Star Horizon Fund awards its first scholarships to 50 black students nationwide. Each acceptance letter ends with the line, "For those once asked to give up their seat, you are now invited to take it." Alicia read the words, then closed her eyes and smiled, not the smile of triumph, but of someone who knows that the right thing has taken root. Somewhere in a college dorm, a young black woman opened her email and froze in disbelief. She'd won one of those scholarships. She read the final line over and over in honor of Alicia Monroe, for those who turned silence into change. She didn't know the full story behind the name, but when she looked at the old airplane ticket pinned to her wall, a keepsake from her mother, she felt something familiar. That feeling of being judged, underestimated, yet refusing to let it define her. She smiled and typed a post online. One day, I'll sit in seat 1A and I won't have to ask permission to be there. The world doesn't change in a single day, but sometimes it only takes one flight, one reminder, and one person who chooses not to retaliate to change how an entire system sees itself. When the lawsuits were finally settled, when the headlines faded and Alicia Monroe's photo no longer filled the front pages of national newspapers, the real story wasn't in the silence that followed, it was in what truly changed after the storm. Because, as Alicia once told her counsel, Evelyn Shaw, real justice isn't about who wins. It's about whether the system learns from the fall it caused itself. Just 1 month after the Seat 18C incident, North Star Air announced a new program called the Open Skies Initiative, a sweeping plan to rebuild trust and reform company culture. At the center of it was the North Star Horizon Fund, a $2 million annual scholarship for Black students pursuing careers in aviation, engineering, and information technology. At the press conference, CEO David Morrison appeared noticeably older. He came without a spokesperson, without polished corporate language, only a single page in his trembling hands. He spoke slowly. We can't erase what happened, but we can begin again by investing in the people we once, perhaps unknowingly, excluded. The room went silent. Then came the applause, quiet, but genuine. The media called it a rare moment when a corporation chose to bow its head, but Alicia wasn't interested in applause. That same day, Morrison sent her a handwritten letter, something almost antique in an age of email. The penmanship was uneven, brief. With your permission, we'd like to redirect your personal compensation settlement estimated at $1.2 million into the Horizon Fund. In your name. Alicia read it once, then set it down with a faint smile. Evelyn, sitting across from her, asked, "You'll accept it, won't you? After everything, they owe you that." Alicia's voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't need payment for humiliation. I need them to pay with change." Then she picked up her pen and wrote beneath Morrison's message in firm, elegant strokes. "I decline personal compensation. Please direct the full amount toward training reform and scholarships. Because if someday a young woman of color sits in seat 1A without being doubted for the shade of her skin, that will be the reward I wanted." News of her decision spread quickly. A tech journal ran the headline, "The woman who turned down $1.2 million to restore dignity for the next generation." Evening talk shows began discussing the Alicia effect as corporations from airlines to tech giants re-examined their ethics training and diversity pipelines. Several companies signed a new corporate diversity and accountability pledge, quoting Alicia's now iconic line, "Sometimes real power comes from calm, not from shouting." 6 months later, spring arrived, bringing with it a new kind of air. The integrated NovaLink North Star system was finally complete. Delayed, yes, but now stronger, safer, and more transparent than ever before. At the signing ceremony, David Morrison personally visited NovaLink headquarters. He moved slowly, humbly. When he met Alicia, he said, "Thank you. I've learned what true power is not the kind that comes from title, but the kind that makes others look inward." Alicia replied simply, "Don't thank me. Thank the people who stayed silent before me. I just happened to be the one who spoke at the right time." They shook hands, no photographers, No cameras, just two people, standing in soft light, both aware that sometimes the greatest business lessons aren't written in numbers, but in awakenings. Afterward, as Alicia left the building, a North Star staff member caught up to her, holding out a ticket and invitation to the company's first restored commercial flight. Ms. Monroe, the board would be honored to have you as our guest of honor on the inaugural flight. Alicia paused, looked at the ticket, the seat number 1A printed in bold. She smiled, shook her head, and handed it back. Thank you. But I don't need to go back to a place that once didn't want me there. I'm already flying in my own way. The employee hesitated, then nodded quietly. Hurrem. That evening, Alicia sat in her small apartment overlooking Lake Union. On her tablet, a headline from Business Chronicle glowed softly. North Star Horizon Fund awards its first scholarships to 50 black students nationwide. Each acceptance letter ends with the line, "For those once asked to give up their seat, you are now invited to take it." Alicia read the words, then closed her eyes and smiled. Not the smile of triumph, but of someone who knows that the right thing has taken root. Somewhere in a college dorm, a young black woman opened her email and froze in disbelief. She'd won one of those scholarships. She read the final line over and over in honor of Alicia Monroe, for those who turned silence into change. She didn't know the full story behind the name, but when she looked at the old airplane ticket pinned to her wall, a keepsake from her mother, she felt something familiar. That feeling of being judged, underestimated, yet refusing to let it define her. She smiled and typed a post online. One day, I'll sit in seat 1A and I won't have to ask permission to be there. The world doesn't change in a single day. But sometimes, it only takes one flight, one reminder, and one person who chooses not to retaliate to change how an entire system sees itself. 6 months after the Seat 18C incident, the world seemed to have moved on, but across America, the name Alicia Monroe still lingered, not as a symbol of outrage, but as a reminder of grace in the midst of the storm. One Tuesday morning, inside the studio of the podcast, Voices That Matter, a show where real people told real stories, Alicia arrived in a light gray jacket, her hair neatly tied up, no jewelry, no spotlight glamour, only her voice calm, deep, and steady filled the quiet room. The host began, "The whole country's heard about you, seen the video, read the headlines. But today, I want to ask, what did you truly feel in that moment, when they asked you to leave your first-class seat?" Alicia smiled faintly, her eyes narrowing as though peering back through a haze of memory. I felt silence. Not because I accepted it, but because I knew that anger, in that moment, would cost me control of the story. They could take my seat, but they couldn't take my composure. The studio fell completely still. The host nodded, then asked softly, "Some say you delivered the perfect revenge." What do you think Alicia answered without hesitation? "I didn't take revenge on anyone. I simply let consequence happen. Revenge is personal. Consequence is structural. It forces a system to face its own reflection." That line was clipped and shared across the internet, quickly becoming a modern proverb. Revenge is personal. Consequence is structural. The interview lasted nearly an hour, but it was the final few minutes that left listeners silent. The host asked if you could go back to that flight. Would you do anything differently? Alicia paused for a moment, then spoke slowly, her voice soft but unwavering. I'd still take seat 18C. I'd still stay quiet and pay attention. Because sometimes, the only way to make people change is not by shouting, but by letting them hear themselves. She smiled gently. People think justice happens when you strike back. But justice truly begins when you let truth do the striking. And truth only needs one thing: to have power, someone brave enough to witness it. She spoke about Marcus Bryant, the young engineer who had filmed that moment. I've always believed power doesn't belong only to people in charge. Power is when you see something wrong and you don't look away. Marcus only had a phone, but he turned it into a tool for justice. The host smiled. What would you like to say to those listening right now? Alicia leaned toward the microphone. Her tone was quiet, but firm. Every word deliberate. Dignity is not negotiable. No matter who you are, where you sit, or what seat you're in, you deserve respect. And if you have even a small bit of power, even something as simple as a phone in your hand, use it. Use it to witness, to speak up, to do what's right. When the episode aired, millions paused at that exact line. On social media, the hashtag #Dignity is not negotiable spread within hours. One listener wrote, "She didn't shout, she didn't rage, but she made the whole world examine itself." Another commented, "I was Jessica, once thinking I was just following protocol. Now I see that sometimes injustice hides behind that very word." Weeks later, North Star Air invited Alicia to speak at the first graduation ceremony for the Horizon Fund scholars. The very fund built from the compensation she'd refused. Alicia accepted. On one condition: no red carpet, no cameras, no scripted speech. She wanted to speak, not perform. The ceremony was simple: a small auditorium filled with students of every background: Black, Latinx, Asian, white. Their eyes gleamed as Alicia spoke. The day I was asked to leave my first-class seat, I thought I'd lost something. But I later realized sometimes God doesn't take your place away. He just moves you to a better one, where you can see more clearly. The room fell silent. She looked across the rows of young faces and finished. If anyone today looks down on you for your background, your skin, or your silence, remember this: the person they underestimate today might be the one shaping their future tomorrow. And when that day comes, choose to be kind, because only dignity makes victory meaningful. The room filled with quiet tears. One young woman came forward, trembling as she held Alicia's hand. "Thank you for showing us that calmness can change the world." Alicia smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Not me, dear. You will change it." In the years that followed, people stopped referring to the 18C flight as a scandal. They began calling it a small landmark of human awakening, a story about a woman who chose intellect over rage, compassion over vengeance. And from that podcast, one closing line endured, especially among the older listeners who had lived through their own eras of injustice and reform. It's not revenge, it's consequence. Because revenge lets you win for a moment. But consequence, when rooted in what's right, can change the world forever. The story of Alicia Monroe. The woman asked to leave her first-class seat, yet who stayed calm and chose intellect over anger, isn't just an airplane drama. It's a mirror, reflecting how we all respond to injustice in our everyday lives. Alicia didn't fight back with shouting or bitterness. She acted with purpose, using her own strength to force a powerful system to look at itself. And because of that, an entire corporation changed, Hundreds of black students received scholarships. Thousands realized that true justice doesn't come from rage. It comes from clarity and self-respect. The lesson her story leaves behind is simple, but powerful. When you're disrespected, you don't have to shout to be heard. Let truth speak for you. When you have power, even something as small as a phone in your hand, use it to witness and to act. And above all, never forget that your dignity is not negotiable. If you've ever been looked down on, if you've ever been pushed out of your own first-class seat in life, remember this. Sometimes, sitting in seat 18C is exactly how you start to redefine justice for the world. Thank you for staying till the end of this story. If you believe that common wisdom can change the world, like, share, and subscribe, so we can keep spreading stories of dignity, justice, and human kindness.